Do women have a more difficult time to lose weight than men?
Yeah, I think again, the reason I said it depends is because it very much depends, I think, on what your body composition is. So
Okay.
it depends on how much muscle, how much fat mass you have. Uh, men compared to many women tend to have a higher ratio of muscle to fat mass. However, this isn't always the case. And that's why it really depends on the individual. I think that what is clear is that the menopause status has a huge role to play in this. And so we know that if you're postmenopausal compared to when you're premenopausal, this has a big impact on your ability to maintain a healthy weight, but also on where the fat is deposited and therefore the healthiness of that fat. Because we know that estrogen has a really important role in directing fat to certain areas in the body, but is also involved in the processes of every cell in our body. Nearly every cell in our body has estrogen receptors. So estrogen has really far reaching activities. So that's why I'd say it depends, because I think it's very much dependent on a woman's menopause status if we're trying to compare them to men.
Hi, my name is Luella Young. I'm a psychotherapist and coach. And if you're interested in how your lifestyle is affecting your mental health, then you're at the right place. On this show, I interview various guests from across the miles and share how their lifestyle choices affects their sense of self, their wealth, and most importantly, their health. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I Think I Can podcast. Today, I am thrilled to have a very special guest from London, England. With me today, I have Sarah Berry. Now, Sarah Berry is a reader in nutritional sciences at King's College, London, and chief scientist at Zoe Limited. And you're going to find out what Zoe is a little bit later on. Her research interests relate to the influence of dietary components on cardiometabolic disease risk, with a particular focus on personalized nutrition, postprandial lipid metabolism, and food and fat structure. Since commencing her research career at King's, she has been the academic leader for more than 30 human nutrition studies in cardiometabolic health. And if you don't already know, my audience, that heart disease is a number one killer for women and men, but it's something that that we really need to start thinking about. So this is why this research is so important. Now, as I mentioned, she's a chief scientist at Zoe Limited, where she leads the PREDICT program of research, assessing the genetic, metabolic, metagenomic, and meal-dependent effects on metabolic responses to food in over 150,000 people. This research is at the forefront of developments in personalized nutrition and is forging a new way forward in the design and implementation of large-scale remote nutrition research studies, integrating novel technologies, citizen science, and AI. Now that's a mouthful, but this if not all of you understood exactly what that means, don't worry because we will explain it. But it's super exciting, and I just commend you, Sarah, for what you're doing. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me join your show.
Okay. So I mean, I'm all about, of course, the mind, but when I realized the importance of physical health on one's mental health, I decided I can't just, you know, I can't do my work well without studying more about metabolic health. So, Sarah, let's start off by just giving the audience a reminder. How would you define metabolic health?
So I think it's an interesting question because there isn't a clear definition that's agreed by everyone. When I think about metabolic health, I think about our health related to how we metabolize food. So
Hmm.
I think about our health in relation to all of the diet related diseases out there that are underpinned by diet. So this could be type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, blood pressure, for example. And so if we have poor metabolic health, and by that mean that, I mean, we metabolize food, we process food, we respond to food in an unhealthy way, that leads to what I consider these metabolic health related conditions that I mentioned before.
Okay. Okay. So you know what? We're going to start this off by doing something kind of fun. I'm just going to ask you a few questions that will sort of give us a foundation for the rest of the interview, and I think this will sort of help us, yeah, clear up maybe some myths that we have, and yeah, clarify things for some of the audience. So I'm going to just ask you a question, and I would like you to just start off by giving a yes and no response to make it very simple. And then you can also say it depends. So, and then we can unpack that a little bit later on. So, are you game?
I'm game,
Okay.
especially because you've allowed me in. It depends.
Okay. Exactly. I mean, okay, I should let you know that Zoe, the company that's doing the research, and how the company that Sarah is a chief scientist for, they also have a wonderful podcast, if you don't know about it already, and it's called Zoe Nutritional Science, I believe. And Zoe is spelled Zoe. And on that podcast, they do this very thing where the host of the show, Jonathan, starts every podcast off with a list of questions for the guest, and it can be very difficult for the guest because just to give a yes no answer, is hard for especially a scientist who wants to explain so much more. So anyway, it's fun. So let's do this. Okay. Sarah.
And Luella, I
Oh,
think it's tough for us as scientists because science isn't an exact science. And so very few scientists will say yes or no. So that's why I love that it depends. But I'm going to try and be brave and do a couple of yeses and nos, although I haven't
okay,
had the questions yet. So
okay, which will make it more exciting. Okay. So is it true, Sarah, that the formula to lose weight is less calories and more exercise?
oh, I'm going to have to say it depends to this one. Okay.
Okay. Okay. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Do women have a more difficult time to lose weight than men?
This is definitely an it depends.
Okay.
Okay.
Does stress play a large role in weight loss?
Yes.
Okay. In general, do you feel our health is more compromised in North America than in Europe?
Yes.
Mm.
But it depends on which European country we're comparing to.
Okay, interesting. So you see there that Sarah sort of cheated a bit because her answer wasn't just depends. Okay, okay. In prioritizing protein over any other, oh wait, is prioritizing protein over any other macronutrient as important as we often hear?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Does exercise directly improve our microbiome?
Oh, I don't know. There is no evidence, I think, that's clear cut on this.
Okay. And you know what? I'm adding one more that just popped into my head this morning, and I thought this is going to be interesting. And again, might be yes, no, might be depends. But would the microbiome of an obese individual be what would be considered worse than the microbiome of um, someone who's not obese?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Super interesting. All
But
right.
not always. But I'm going to be bold and brave and say yes.
Okay. I know this is super hard. This is super hard. It's almost like tying your hands behind your back and,
It's
trying to
like
ball.
it's like asking a mum which child you prefer.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So the first one that you said, it depends. The first question was, um, I think you said it depends. Is it true that the formula to lose weight is less calories and more exercise?
Yeah, I did. I said it depends. And I think
Yeah.
I said that for a number of reasons.
Okay.
I said it firstly because we're all different. We all respond differently. And this is at the heart of what we're doing with our Zoe Predict research, that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other. So calorie counting, more exercise might work for one person, might not work for another. But also, I said it depends because there's really good evidence now to show that the approach that we need to maintain a healthy weight is different during two different phases related to weight. So during the weight loss phase, i.e., people are trying to actively lose weight, that's where a calorie reduction has the most impact. But exercise doesn't have as much an impact. But what we see is there's good evidence emerging now to show that when you're in the weight maintenance phase, i.e., so you've had that initial weight loss, that's when exercise starts to become more important. And so people who think that, okay, I want to lose weight, I'm not going to watch what I'm eating, but I'm just going to do loads and loads and loads of exercise. You can't do that alone for most people to reduce your weight. But calorie counting as well is really ineffective in terms of long-term weight loss. It doesn't achieve sustainable weight loss. And this is for a couple of reasons. And there's great research that's been conducted on this coming out of Kevin Hall's group in the US. And this is two main reasons where we know calorie restriction also on its own isn't effective in achieving weight loss that's sustained. I.e., you get that initial rapid weight loss, but then poof, you ping it back on. And this is because our hunger signals are so strong. Our body is so clever at saying, whoa, hold on, you've suddenly reduced your calories. We are evolved to try and cope in a world of starvation. We are not evolved to cope in this current food landscape of calorie excess. So our bodies sense that, whoa, your calories intake is reducing. You're putting me into starvation mode. I've got to be super effective to make sure I actually eat more calories. And so a couple of things happen. One is any kind of weight loss and calorie restriction drives an increase in your hunger signals. And it drives an increase in your hunger signals above what it would have been in order to get that deficit of calories back. So let's say you have a reduction in calorie intake of, let's say, I don't know, 300 calories a day. The hunger signals are going to be even more powerful than that 300 calories. So that's the first thing that happens. What also happens is you have a reduction in your metabolic rate. So you have a reduction in how much calories your body burns just at rest. Now, this isn't quite as big as what we first thought from evidence that came out maybe 10, 20 years ago, but it still does occur that you expend less energy just from sitting at rest because you become very conservative. You become trying to preserve your energy that you're having. And your brain is driving you to eat more calories. Now, in the initial phase of weight loss, many people can maintain that, what I hate to call self-control, but I am going to use that in inverted commas, that kind of self-control or that drive to, fight against that hunger. But there's only so long that you can fight against the incredibly powerful signals that are going to your brain to encourage you to eat more food, because they are powerful signals. And so that's why a lot of calorie counting diets fail, because you've got this counter regulatory system preventing you from being able to lose weight, because we evolved to maintain a healthy weight in an environment where there was not excess calories.
Okay. It's complicated, right? And I think what you mentioned right there, it takes into consideration why people that do like all the dieting, the yo-yo dieting, can really can mess up their metabolic rate, right? I mean, because when you go into that starvation mode and your basal metabolic rate drops, and then you start trying to, re-enter more calorie consumption, that's when it can become tricky. And I think that's maybe that in that sense, adding exercise in order to maintain might be helpful.
Yeah, so that's why, after you've lost that initial weight, adding in exercise is building muscle. We know that muscle uses more energy than fat. Um, what we do know is that some people, when they go on a calorie deficit, so they're reducing their energy intake, sometimes some of the weight loss is actually from muscle, not just adipose tissue, which is where you want it from.
Mm.
And so if you can maintain your muscle mass, and more importantly, increase your muscle mass during the weight maintenance phase, then that will help maintain a healthy metabolic rate.
Okay. Okay. Um, okay. So let's move on to the next question. So, do women have a more difficult time to lose weight than men?
Yeah, I think again, the reason I said it depends is because it very much depends, I think, on what your body composition is. So
Okay.
it depends on how much muscle, how much fat mass you have. Uh, men compared to many women tend to have a higher ratio of muscle to fat mass. However, this isn't always the case, and that's why it really depends on the individual. I think that what is clear is that the menopause status has a huge role to play in this. And so we know that if you are postmenopausal compared to when you're premenopausal, this has a big impact on your ability to maintain a healthy weight, but also on where the fat is deposited and therefore the healthiness of that fat. Because we know that estrogen has a really important role in directing fat to certain areas in the body, but is also involved in the processes of every cell in our body. Nearly every cell in our body has estrogen receptors. So estrogen has really far-reaching activities. So that's why I'd say it depends, because I think it's very much dependent on a woman's menopause status if we're trying to compare them to men.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sort of hearing a theme. Uh, uh, and then I think I'm going to jump to the last question. Like the theme of, um, like you mentioned estrogen, and we can talk about testosterone as well. Like we have both hormones, both men and women have both hormones. It's just the proportion of these two sex hormones, with men having more testosterone than women, which makes it easier for them to gain muscle mass, and and therefore I think their ability to burn more calories because of that muscle mass that you mentioned earlier as being very important in terms of increasing the metabolic rate. Um, you know, that could be a reason why men do have an easier time losing weight than women, just due to the amount of muscle that they have compared to women.
Yeah, but we know weight maintenance, which isn't really a primary area of my research. So, I'm giving you my perspective on what I have read on this. It's not an area that I actively research myself, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so multifactorial
Yeah.
that there's so many different factors. You know,
Mm-hmm.
from all sorts of um, factors related to our lifestyle, our built environment, all sorts of different exposures. Hundreds and hundreds of factors feed into it. So, for example, I mean, I'll just pick one out of the air that we might not even think about typically. Let's say sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep, for example, we know if you have a poor night's sleep, the next day the reward centers in your brain drive you to make less healthy dietary choices. The reward centers in your brain are needing a quick fix. So if you have a poor night's sleep, you're more likely, and trials have shown this, to select foods that give you that quick fix. So for particularly high sugar foods.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that if you've had a poor night's sleep, the next day you will actually go on to eat more food,
Mm-hmm.
typically, than if you've had a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that if you've had a poor night's sleep, your blood glucose response, that's your blood sugar response to a high carbohydrate meal, is worse than if you've had a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So sleep is affecting all of these different things. It's making you eat rubbish, it's making you eat more, and it's making you process the food differently. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just from getting a bad night's sleep. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's just
Mm-hmm.
one of 100 factors. So if you're someone that's a poor sleeper because your kids are waking you up loads because you've got young kids, or you're stressed because of work, or you're just not getting enough sleep because you're trying to do too many things, that could be a really important driver of why you're putting on weight or not maintaining a healthy weight.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be one of 100 other factors that are going on in your life that are
Mm-hmm.
contributing to this. And there's some really interesting sleep extension studies, for example, that get short eaters, short sleepers to extend their sleep duration using all sorts of sleep hygiene. And what they find is that results in a reduction in energy intake, a healthier food consumption, and therefore a reduction in BMI. Now, that's just one example of the million things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about weight. And so sometimes I think that we can get very focused on the mechanisms, on things that we've been talking about, like how
Yeah.
does muscle versus fat burn it? Well, that's interesting. But actually, let's take a postmenopausal woman. 85% of postmenopausal women have sleep disturbances. So they've got
Mm-hmm.
all of these other problems to do with sleep. They've got maybe brain fog, anxiety, depression, which we see from our own data. More than 50% of postmenopausal women have this during the menopause transition. Plus, they've suddenly lost all of their estrogen. Therefore, their fat is being deposited not in the kind of healthy area around their hips, but suddenly around their tummy, which is really metabolically an unhealthy area.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're tired, so they're maybe eating rubbish, maybe processing it more poorly, maybe don't want to do any physical activity, because when you're exhausted, it's
Yeah.
the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
And then you've also got the fact that all your estrogen's changing. There's all of these kind of perfect storms, I
Yeah.
think, that are different for everyone. Everyone has their own perfect storm, unfortunately, that contributes to whatever their diet related illness might be. And in the case of obesity, then I think we have to be thinking always at an individual level, what's going on in your life? And then, do you know what, Luella? The worst thing is we live in this, I don't like this word, but I think it describes it. It sums it up. We live in an obesogenic environment. We live
Mm-hmm.
in an environment where the food landscape is just pitted against us,
Mm-hmm.
of these, excessively tasty, high calorie, rapidly digested foods, where the accessibility to healthy foods for many people is challenging, where we have sedentary lifestyles, where we're stressed, where we're working long hours, where, both parents in the household are working full time and don't necessarily have the time for, healthy food for them and their kids. So I think that it's really, really difficult. And I think there's a lot of guilt associated for people who are overweight, who are struggling. But I think that it's really important to recognize, do you know what? You're living in a world that, well, certainly if you're in the UK and the US, that it's bloody difficult to
Yeah.
maintain a healthy weight without being really proactive about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like everything you said, and it's so true, and that's why it is a mind body. Uh, we can't separate it. And like you mentioned, guilt. You talked about shame. You could add brain fog in there too for the
Yep.
menopausal woman, and and as someone who's just turned 56 this month, it's it never ends either with your children. Like, I mean, you talked about young children, but I have three adult children in the home, and even, I mean, we're talking about like such different I mean, when I was in university, obviously, I wasn't concerned about healthy or unhealthy food. That's the other thing. And now as an adult, I'm much more concerned at it. But I'm battling with three other young adults here in the home, trying to give them a really good foundation where, I mean, they're concerned about having fun and getting decent grades in university. And, that's the last thing really on their mind, sort of thing. So, um, I- yeah, and it never ends, and all we can do is gather the best research, or the best knowledge we can, and try to make educational, this best guesses, sort of. But yeah, we do live in that sort of society where it is pitted against us. It really is, because yeah, the food industry. Go ahead. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think, Luella, to pick up on a couple of your points, particularly relate as a parent of children, like
Hmm.
my children now are 11 and 14.
Mm,
As a parent, we worry about everything, but
yeah.
I do worry about their diets. But I think, and a lot of parents worry about their children's diet, but we cannot firstly be responsible for what they eat once they're teenagers. We
Yeah.
can give them healthy foundations. But I also think that I see a lot of parents that I know over worrying about what their children are eating.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we've got to think about the size effect of actually any changes that we might be trying to encourage in them. So there are some things that just aren't really going to make that big an impact on our health.
Mm-hmm.
Pick your battles.
Mm-hmm.
Which every parent says, it's working out which battles to pick. There's some dietary habits that if we can change will have a huge impact. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's about, if we can, as parents, be educated in the many different tools that there are in our toolbox that we can use for ourselves, but also for our children. So, for example, we know that about 20% of our energy comes from breakfast. We know that about 25% of most people's energy comes from snacks. Okay.
Mm.
Breakfast and snacks are meals that are typically eaten in isolation, i.e., under self selection. So, lots of people, their lunch and their dinner might be dictated by what their kids want to eat in the evening, or who else is in their household, or if it's their lunch, what they have access to in their work canteen, etc. But most people, for their breakfast and their snacks, are under more self control, that you can choose yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that it's a case of stepping back and thinking, okay, what do I have the power to change? So thinking about you as an individual, but also like for your children, could I just tell them, do you know what? I'm not going to stress about all this stuff that you're eating. But
Mm-hmm.
what I do want you to do is, can you just have a healthy breakfast? Let's work on finding a breakfast that you enjoy and that is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think making sure you find something they enjoy is really important. I always say one of my mottos is if a food is too healthy to be enjoyed, it's just not healthy at all. So it's about finding a food that they're going to enjoy. Can we find snacks that they like? If a
Mm-hmm.
quarter of their energy is coming from snacks, a quarter of our energy is coming from snacks, that's a phenomenal way that we can improve health. And we've actually done a study here at King's where we told people, continue with your normal snacks. This was a randomized clinical trial. Have normal, typical UK, US style snacks. And then half the people, we said, okay, actually, can you swap out these snacks and have almond nuts instead, which
Mm-hmm.
we know are healthy for us? Those people that snacked 25% of their energy every day on almond nuts versus those that stuck with their traditional snacks, we said, don't change anything else. Carry on your normal activity, carrying on your normal food, carry on drinking alcohol if you drink alcohol, carry on doing whatever you normally
Mm-hmm.
do. But those people who had the almonds instead of the normal snacks, they went on to have significant improvements in what we call cardiometabolic health, so that metabolic health related to cardiovascular disease. They had improvements in blood cholesterol. They have had improvements in the functioning of their blood vessels. They had improvements in heart rate variability, and many other outcomes just from changing that one thing. And I think
Mm.
that's really powerful, I think, not just as parents, but as individuals, that I don't have to change everything.
It,
I
it,
could change one thing and that can make a big impact. And this is why giving people lots of different tools for their toolbox, like time restricted eating, I often say to people, if you could just maybe have a 12-hour period overnight where you don't eat, if you could ideally finish eating by 8 in the evening, carry on everything else as you normally would. That's
Mm.
going to improve, for most people, that will have an impact on improving your health. And I think if we can give people those, say, look, here's lots of different tools. This is the size effect.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you're empowered to choose what will fit with your lifestyle.
Yeah, great points. And so, with you speaking about that, like very good points, because, I look back at what I was eating at my children's age, and what I'm now eating, how I adopted eating for many, many years. And it's very different. So I know that over time, being modeled, um, a, a certain way to our children, modeling certain behaviors to our children, it will all be okay. It's just as long as you model. But let's kind of zoom out a little bit and talk about the Zoe study, because what you sort of got in there, started speaking about a little bit, you're more or less referring to the microbiome. Um, and so why don't you just start explaining what the Zoe study is and what you're doing there?
Yeah, so Zoe is a healthcare tech company, and it was formed and it runs with the mission of improving the health of millions, and improving the health through offering personalized nutrition solutions. So offering advice at an individual level, and it's based on the theory that we know that diet related, or not theory, it's based on the fact that diet related diseases are increasing at an alarming rate. And this is despite very good evidence for population-based guidelines. So each country has their own population-based guidelines. For example, you have My Plate in the US, we have the Eat Well Guide in the UK, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there's good evidence underpinning population-based guidelines, but the problem is that these diet-related diseases are increasing, year on year. And this is for a number of reasons, and this is where personalized nutrition comes in. So firstly, people don't follow the guidelines. So in the US and North America, less than 1% of the people actually follow the core dietary guidelines, and people aren't actually adhering to them. The other problem is that we know that we all respond so differently to food. And so a one-size-fits-all approach isn't necessarily always the best approach, given how we all respond so differently. Yeah, population-based guidelines are based on what we call the average response or the mean response, based on how, on average, people respond. But given that a high-fat, low-carb diet might work for one person, but a low-fat, high-fat, low-carb, or whatever, the other way around might not work for another person. And given the growing body of evidence from our own work about how everyone responds differently, we set out on a mission to be able to look at if we could work out how much variability there is between people day to day and how they respond to food, and how much variability there is within a person day to day, how they respond to food, and to work out what are the exposures, what are the different factors explaining all of this variability. Is it the same for everyone? And therefore, if we could collect lots of data on this, could we actually build some kind of model in order to predict the best food for one person versus the other person? And so we started out on a whole series of studies. These are called the Zoe Predict studies. Our Zoe Predict 1 study is the study that's most published at the moment. This was a very in-depth study in 1,000 individuals in the UK and 100 individuals in the US. And this study aimed to address some of those questions. How much variability is there? What's explaining this variability? And can we predict how someone will respond to food? We then, using all of this information, launched a commercial personalized nutrition product, using a lot of the data collected from this first study, and using the kind of technologies that we used in the first study, where we can remotely collect lots of information about how people respond to food. So people wear continuous glucose monitors. We collect poo samples in order to look at the microbiomes, these trillions of bacteria in our gut. We do dry blood finger pricks. So we do finger prick and kind of dot it on a bit of paper to look at, hundreds of different circulating metabolites. People log everything that they eat and drink. They'll log their mood, their hunger, their energy, their physical activity level, etc. And what this enables us to do is then collect even more data for us to learn from, but also we can use the results from all of this analysis at an individual level to guide people on the best food for them. Now, there's basic underpinning principles that are the same for everyone. We should all eat more fiber. We should all eat more fruit and vegetables. We should all eat more pulses, and we should all reduce our ultra-processed food intake. But what we know is to optimize how healthy the diet is if we use this personalized approach, we can ensure that we're optimizing to deliver advice in a personalized way so people would adhere to it more, but deliver advice that's personalized to that individual according to their biology, but also according to how they live their life. And this is a really exciting new area of personalization that we're learning a lot from our Zoe Predict studies, that how you respond to food does differ based on your biology. So it could be based on your microbiome, your age, your sex, whether you're pre or post-menopausal, etc., your genetics. But it also differs according to how you live your life. And this is where factors like sleep, which I mentioned earlier, come in. Time of day that you're eating your food, your fasting period, the order that you're eating your food, even like the speed at which you eat your meal. So how you eat your food also impacts your responses to food. And then within personalization, we also need to think about why you're making the choices you're making. Is it because you simply like that food? Is it because of your culture, your emotions, your social setting, etc.? So it's all around personalization. It's all around collecting lots of data for us to understand more about how people respond to food, but also to enable us to deliver the best individual advice to our members as well, so that they can improve their health.
Okay, thank you for that. So let me just sort of summarize that in perhaps less technical terms. So when a person signs up for the Zoe study, what happens is they are sent a kit to their home, and in that kit they're given various little tools, a CGM, which is a continuous glucose monitor, something that you slap on your arm, and it reads your blood glucose levels, which and it displays it on your phone in the form of an app, which is amazing. And as Sarah mentioned, you give blood samples. And you also send in a poop sample, which is a lot of fun. And after, I think it's a 2-week period, right, Sarah?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So after a 2-week period of doing this, then you send off the data you send off the collections back to Zoe, and then they, after a few weeks, I think, inform you of how you what foods of the 3 macronutrients do you metabolize the best? Is that correct?
So right up until that point, it was correct. So after you send all of your specimens back, so your poo, your finger prick, your data from your continuous glucose monitor, plus you'll have completed lots of questionnaires on the app as well.
Okay.
Then we use all of our learnings from these previous Predict studies that we've conducted to give you personalized insights into how you respond to different foods. Now, it's not actually based on macronutrients. Okay, we do say whether you process carbohydrates, so sugar, well.
Okay.
We do talk about how you respond to fat as well. And we talk about the health of your gut microbiome. But the way that the advice is actually packaged is in terms of each food. So when you get your personalized scores back, you can look up every food and it will tell you the healthiness of that food based on your own results from the testing phase. But it will be based very much on a food by food basis rather than on a macronutrient basis, because we know in nutrition that we don't eat nutrients, we eat foods, we dietary patterns. And so you might be a poor blood sugar responder, but actually if you're combining, let's say, your rice with healthy proteins and healthy fat, then that creates a healthy meal for you. So we make sure that the advice is actually given on a food and meal basis related to all of those ingredients in that food.
Okay, that's even better. Okay, wonderful. So what this actually explains then is, how your partner can eat a breakfast of bacon and eggs for most of his life and not gain a pound, whereas as soon as you start adopting that, um, you know, you put on the pounds, uh, or you're somebody that loves oatmeal every day and doesn't gain a pound when somebody else beside you start doing the same thing, then they tend to gain a lot of weight. So rather than, be perplexed by all this, now with this fascinating new science, this is what we mean about personalized nutrition. And yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I would caveat that a little bit by saying that whilst it's personalized, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, that there's principles that apply for everyone. So
Yes.
a bacon and egg breakfast having every day is going to be bad for everyone.
Okay.
There's too much saturated fat in that bacon. It's probably cured with loads of salt. It's not going to be the
Hmm.
best for everyone.
Hmm.
But what we see is that, let's say, oats, for example, some people have a very high blood sugar response to those oats and then a dip, which makes them feel a bit rubbish later, might make them eat more energy at their next meal,
Hmm.
consume more calories over the day. Other people might eat oats and they process it in such a way that it causes a more sustained, slow increase in circulating blood sugar. And so they feel fuller for longer and they eat less at their next meal. So it's there where we see subtle differences. I think as well, at the heart of what we're doing is not looking at weight or calories. So we don't count calories. So
Yeah.
what we're interested in doing is we're interested in giving people guidance on healthy foods that will allow them to improve their health from the inside.
Hmm.
And over time, you will see an improvement, or you will, increase the likelihood of maintaining a healthy weight.
Hmm.
First and foremost, starting from the inside out is the sustainable way to maintain a healthy weight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what this also explains is that, see, like in the scenario I gave, you might be looking at your partner and I mentioned this whole idea of, him eating bacon and eggs every morning and not gaining a pound. But as you like reminded us, it has very little to do with weight gain because there's skinny fat, right? Where
Yes.
with all the fat being around, which is visceral fat around
Yeah.
your organs, and this person, might be like susceptible to cardiovascular disease because of all the saturated fat, but they're just looking at themselves in the mirror and they're thinking, you see, like, I mean, I have no problem eating this type of food. So um, now we get to look underneath the hood a little bit more and understand, um, yeah, the actual science behind, metabolic health. And one other thing I wanted to know too is what does this all have to do with the microbiome? Like what's actually happening? Like when we get the results back and we've got these suggestions on, these are the types of foods that you should incorporate, maybe together and this is what you should concentrate on in order to become more metabolically healthy. What's actually happening to the microbiome?
Yeah, so the microbiome is a fascinating area of research. It's an exploding area of research. And I think if I can just pause for a moment just to explain what we mean by the microbiome. So
Mm-hmm.
The gut microbiome is what we measure at Zoe. It's what most of the current research is focused on. But we have also microbiome throughout our whole body. You have your oral microbiome, you have your skin microbiome. But your
Hmm.
gut microbiome refers to the trillions and trillions of bacteria that live in your gut.
Hmm.
Okay. And we now know that your gut microbiome, the composition and the activity and the chemicals they produce have an impact on our health.
Hmm.
This is recent evidence, but we know that the chemicals they produce impact everything from our cardiovascular health to our mental health and so much more, and impact so many different organs in our body.
Hmm.
We know that we can change the composition of the microbiome through diet. So we know that if we feed people certain foods, we can change the different bacteria that live in our gut, because the microbiome in our gut eats the food that is delivered to our lower gut.
Hmm.
Okay. We know that if you increase your fiber, that's the most important way to improve your microbiome, because your fiber is resistant to digestion. And so it reaches your large intestine, which is where these microbes are and have a party munching away at your fiber.
Hmm.
And so we have evidence from our Zoe Predict research that there's certain microbial species that are associated with a healthy diet and favorable measures of health. And there's certain species that are associated with a poor diet and unfavorable measures of health, like increased inflammation, worse blood pressure, worse adiposity, worse blood cholesterol, etc. So we are giving people advice on what foods to eat in order to increase these good microbes, the ones that are associated with healthy measures of health. Now, we still need to establish what we call a causal link, and this is really important in scientific research. Just because we know something is associated with something doesn't necessarily mean it's causal. So what we're now doing is we're doing a whole series of studies where we're looking at how, if we offer people advice based on their microbiome composition, when we give them that personalized advice, dietary advice, does it change the microbiome and does it have downstream health effects? And we've recently analysed some of that data and we see, yes, it does change the microbiome. So we can use diet to manipulate the microbiome. And now what we need to do is see if that will then have a causal impact, so that it will itself then change some of these health outcomes. But
Hmm.
it's a really promising area of research, and it's an area that's going to continue to grow as we continue to understand more.
Hmm. Okay. I'm being cognizant of the time, and I know you have to run. So I'm just going to mention a couple other things.
Yeah,
What Sarah is speaking about here too, and like I'm going to bring it back to it's multifactorial. So even though we're going to get the clinical data back from this study, we cannot um, you know overemphasize the importance of like the lifestyle factors that are that you cannot get away from while you're eating food. For example, are you deficient in sleep? Are you eating your food in front of the computer, rushing between appointments and
yeah,
trying to answer stressful emails while you're eating this beautiful Mediterranean salad in front of you, for example? Like
yeah,
there's only so much that the specific food can do, in terms of changing the composition of your microbiome. I'm a huge believer in stress and what stress can do to the physical body. It is just, I think, as important as the actual food components.
yeah.
So like this is why like we can't separate the two, you guys. And even though this type of research is fascinating, we have to look at the lifestyle structures. They're extremely important. So so I'm just going to say, as we end here, that I feel extremely guilty because I feel that I just teased all of you out there, like I because we hit on so many like tiny little topics that are like extremely interesting, and I know you all want to dive in deeper, but let's just say this is part one, and I'll grab Sarah, later on and sort of do a part two to sort of like pick this apart a little bit more. And the one other thing I have to mention is now I feel even more guilty because for all our Canadian listeners, now I can let you know that you don't have access to Zoe. It's only for our American neighbors and the UK. It's not available anywhere else, correct, Sarah?
Correct for now, but we do have the Zoe Science Nutrition podcast, which is great. We have lots of information on our website.
Yeah.
And so, our podcast is really about giving actionable advice. So I think it really complements the testing product anyway. So if
Yeah,
you want to,
exactly.
I do suggest go to the podcast.
Yes, yes. Okay. Okay. One other thing, Sarah, quickly, I need to ask you the question that our last guest has left. And that question is, which is great because you are a mother and you are jumping all over the place with your work. But if you were given an extra 2 hours out of your day, what would you do with it?
Oh my gosh, I want a whole 24 hours. What would I do with it? I'll
Yeah.
be very honest, I would be tempted to work to finish those hundreds of emails that I never get to because I'm in back-to-back meetings all day. But you know what I'd like to do with it? I would like to break it up, and I would like to break it up and use it a couple of different ways. I'd like to spend an hour with the kids, focused, no distraction. I'd like to spend half an hour doing some physical activity. And then I would like to spend half an hour trying to go back to basics of me cooking from scratch again, because I have lost that in my busy, busy life that I have. So I think that's what I do. Some of it's for me, some of it's for the family, but most importantly, spending some time with the kids.
I'd love it. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, again, thank you all for listening and reach out to me if you want a little bit more information on Zoe because I've dug deep with it and I'm going to let Sarah go. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us
Pleasure.
today. Okay.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Everyone else, have a great week. Bye-bye. Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.